Today's session on human trafficking. Just a couple of reminders before we get started. Please keep your microphones and your cameras off during the presentation to minimize distractions. Also, if you need a certificate of completion, please email Stacey at the end of today's presentation. And last but not least, we appreciate any and all feedback and presentation topics. So at the end of today's session, there will be a link emailed to you with a very short survey. So if you could please fill that out and provide any feedback and possible topics for the future, we gladly take any of that feedback. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah Johnston with the North Dakota Human Trafficking Task Force.
Awesome. Thank you, Kylie. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to just start sharing my screen right away. All right. And you guys can see that okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, hi, like Kylie said, my name is Sarah. Hopefully by the time it's his turn, my training partner, Rati, will be joining us. We've had some new clients, and so he's been working with them. Rati is our labor trafficking specialist, and if he does get to come on, it'll be very exciting. If not, I'll be sharing his information today. So we're going to be talking about kind of what it looks like, what trafficking looks like in North Dakota, what it is, what to do, and then kind of that housing sector that this topic is kind of surrounded around. So I like to show this picture. This is Rati and I. We were at a fundraiser for one of our partners. And a little bit about us. I've been with the task force now going on 2 years. I think Rati was there a little bit longer than I was, or that I have been. So Rati, actually, we are the only task force in the United States that has a labor trafficking specialist. And so he has been doing a lot of mentoring to other task forces that are just starting. We have some really cool coalitions, and our director gets to meet with the task forces that are in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. And while I'm on this picture, I just want to give a few disclaimers for our presentation today. One, human trafficking can be a heavy topic. If you're feeling emotional or it's starting to trigger some things, that's okay. It's okay to take a break, walk away. Your cameras are all off, so I can't see you. That won't offend me. Even if I could see you, it doesn't offend me if you walk away. I like to give this disclaimer. I am not a survivor of human trafficking, but I have worked with survivors, and I have been doing a lot of research, and I work with a lot of our partners, so I have learned a lot. Throughout this, I will share some stories. None of the stories that I'm sharing have been given to me in private, so I will not be disclosing anything that is a secret or that a survivor or a victim does not want shared. And something about human trafficking is that it is an ever-growing field. And what we talk about this week may change next week. So keep that in mind. If you hear something different or we say something later that contradicts, it's because we're all learning and this field is relatively new. Any of the data that I will be sharing today is data that we record. So keep in mind that data is only as good as what is reported to us. It's not a complete picture, and it will seem like it is growing slightly. And that is because as we have grown as a task force, the education and the identification in North Dakota has grown with us. So like I said, data is only as good as what we've had reported on, but we really do only like to share what we see in North Dakota because that's what's kind of relevant to us. All right, so I like to start with this quote by one of the survivors that we get to work with. And I'm just going to read it out loud to keep this in mind while we go through the presentation and kind of let this guide us. There's power in numbers. If we as a society get the "it takes a village" mentality back, we can move mountains. Slow down. See people. See the people that are hurting, that are taking paths that are out of the normal. Be the last beacon of hope that they may have. See them as your very own loved one. refrain from looking down on survivors and victims, placing blame or questioning the whys of why they would do it, or why wouldn't they say anything. Most times, we are harder on ourselves than anyone could ever be. So let this guide. Everyone is needed. It doesn't matter if you're working in the field of human trafficking by title, or you're working with students, you're working with those in a shelter. Every level of society, every level of work has been in contact with someone that has been trafficked, and we all have our place, whether it's in advocacy or whether it's in direct services. So today we're going to define and recognize how to identify human trafficking. We're going to understand the role that you play and understand that that journey does not end after identification. So due to the complex nature that human trafficking has, we often have an eclectic approach to how we help survivors, how we identify, and that can be in a number of ways throughout a community and have many different members involved. Keep in mind that when we are working with those that have been trafficked, that language counts. The words you use make a difference. Calling us prostitutes hurts us. That was by one of the survivors that we work with that was involved in a sex trafficking situation. Right now, best practice is to use the terms individuals with lived experience of human trafficking or individuals who have experienced human trafficking. Sometimes you'll hear me say clients, survivors, and victims simply because I get tongue-tied when I try to use the long title, but that is what we're working towards. I'm human. I am trying to work towards that, but in my speaking journey, I'm not quite there yet. To understand that unless you're looking for human trafficking, it is a hidden crime. But not only that, I like to say that it's unless you're listening for it. You're not necessarily going to go see someone in public and they're going to have a red triangle on their forehead that says, I have been trafficked. You're more likely going to recognize it by having conversations and genuine connection with people. Starting off with as simple as, are you safe? Or have you eaten today? Those can be the most basic things to start a conversation. I listened to one speaker and they said that it can take up to 15 connections with someone, and not always that same person, but 15 connections before someone is willing to say they need help. So whether I'm that first person, 7th person, 15th, and maybe that person needs 40 people to show that they care, we all have a place to play in that identification. And you know, sometimes you're going to get someone that doesn't want to share and says they're fine, and you clearly see that they're not safe, and that is okay. They're just not ready in their journey. So who are we? Why am I here today to share with you? Well, I am a part of the Human Trafficking Task Force, and our mission statement is this. We are statewide, multidisciplinary collaboration of law enforcement, service providers, and prosecution, established to work in a victim-centered manner to detect, prevent, disrupt, and dismantle human trafficking through coordinated, comprehensive services and efficient investigation and prosecution. We're a team. We have our core team of 5 that work closely together, and we have an extension of an operational team. But really, what is the task force is those groups that are identified in communities that are wanting to be a part of a multidisciplinary team. We have the prosecutors and law enforcement. Those are obvious. We have the service providers such as local shelters. We're always looking for new members. But in some communities, some pastors are involved. In one community, we have a lot of nurses. It just depends on who is wanting to be involved. My region, and I'll get to that in a little bit, I am open to anyone that wants to serve, wants to learn more, and wants to be a part of the team. Sometimes those teams are called upon to do something as simple as helping a survivor move, right? It sometimes takes a bunch of us to move some boxes, and we like to have those safe people that we can call on that have been trained, just come move boxes. But not only that, we have some nonprofits that get to do some exciting things. We had a survivor that had a baby, and one of our nonprofits put together a gigantic basket of goodies for that individual. And not only for their new baby, but for the new mom and for the other children that were in the house. So that was kind of an exciting little surprise, a feel-good moment that's beyond, the medical bills and the things that we see that are kind of trauma focused. As a task force, we were started at the end of 2015, but we didn't start collecting data until 2016. We focus on those investigations, but honestly, helping the people, helping those that have been trafficked, that is our first goal, making sure that we can find safety. Sometimes our success looks as great as bringing someone all the way through to federal court, and other times success is finding someone a safe place to stay for the night. We do a lot of reimbursements. Some agencies may see, 35 victims throughout the year. And in that case, usually they have dedicated funding, but there are other smaller agencies or organizations that may only help one person every 5 years. Well, we're here to help reimburse those costs. We know that, some agencies don't have a lot of funding, but we're here to help either pay for some transportation. We do have some restrictions, but we help with many things from buying something as simple as a toothbrush all the way up to helping with certain medical bills if they were associated with trafficking. We have provided iPads for virtual appointments, but we do phones, we offer training, we do response team meetings, which that is when we have someone that is identified, we talk to them, we work through what services they're looking for, and we gather those together so that we really can let that survivor, that person that has been trafficked, we let them decide who they would like to work with because choice is often taken away. We also assist with technical support. So any questions, no question is too silly for me. I've answered some real ridiculous ones, but also that has led into some great conversation. We can help organizations come up with protocols that are really trauma informed and victim centered. We won't write them for you, but we'll help kind of go through the process, and we can do some revision and read through them to help really focus those protocols. Since we started recording, we've actually helped a total of 700 victims. Now, like I said, that's not me helping them, that is everybody across the state. And again, it's not a full picture. There are some victims that I'm sure have been served that they either did not identify or weren't identified, but also weren't reported on. And something I think a lot of people think is that it's always children. We have actually helped more adults than children or than minors in the state of North Dakota. So what does that look like in our state? I mentioned we have multidisciplinary teams. Well, every red dot is where we have a team. It does not just serve that city, but each city that it's located in was chosen because there's the most services available, the most variety of services. So my region is the central region. I have Minot and Bismarck. I love serving those regions. I went to college in Minot, so it's very close to my heart. And now I live in the Bismarck area, and I have for several years. North Dakota holds a special place in my heart. I think we have a lot to offer, and we're really good about coming together as a community. And I see that when I work with our teams in each of our areas. Now, each gray star is where we've had a reported incident of trafficking. Not a full picture. Someone may not disclose every city that they were trafficked in, and that is okay. It's not about disclosure with someone. We want to get them the services that they're needed, but we do work on trying to put some sort of picture. Now, I grew up a little south of Jamestown, so there's that little path of stars that you can see, and I know which cities they are, and that hits kind of close to home for me because I lived in that small rural community where you know everybody, and this means that probably somebody I knew was trafficked. I remember growing up and hearing different things and not knowing what I was looking for, and potentially those people that either we looked down on or we said they were sleeping their way around potentially could have been in trafficking situations. Some ask if we serve people that are just moved in through North Dakota, and actually we serve 81% of the people we've served have been North Dakota residents, and only 19% were non-residents. So these are people that either you have walked by on the street, you may have grown up with, or you may even work with that either have been trafficked, could have been a trafficker, could have been someone that purchased someone either for sex trafficking, or really could have someone working for them that is being labor trafficked, and we'll go through that. So our state gets broken up. We have 3 of us navigators. Like I said, that central region is mine, but what's really great about our state is I look at it as it's one great city with a bunch of little suburbs that are all around, and we're really connected. I could probably go to almost every small town and mention someone's name, and I would probably find someone that knows someone that I know. And we always have that instant connection. We were doing some outreach in part of the state just to talk to some of our visa workers and, inform of rights, check to make sure that they're doing okay. And when I was looking through the list, I personally knew several of the farmers and the ranchers that were on the list. So it's kind of that unique situation. We know everybody, and sometimes that can create bias. We may not want to recognize that somebody was a victim of somebody that we knew, or we may know someone that has been victimized and they may not want to share because you know the person that victimized them, or you know the victim. We see a lot of shame and stigma in our state. We have 3, like I said, 3 great navigators. If you failed your county's test like I did, that had nothing to do with my not state's education, I just can't memorize very well. This is the list of counties that we share or that we serve. All the counties in the state, but the ones in the central part are what I serve. So what is human trafficking? The federal definition, I'm not going to read it, it's wordy, but we're going to go through it. The federal definition breaks trafficking down into 2 categories. We have sex trafficking and we have labor trafficking. Now, breaking those down into 2 categories can often create a false dichotomy of an idea that they're 2 separate things, but often they exist together. So understanding that sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person or for the purpose of a commercial sex act on which that is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person is forced to perform a commercial sex act that's under 18. And we'll go through that a little bit further. That makes more sense, right? That's really wordy. That's the federal definition. Most of us that are helping people, we don't have to prove that federal definition. We're just there to serve. And forced labor looks almost exactly the same, except it's not for commercial sex acts. It's for involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. Basically, let's break that down. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 is really what equipped the government with tools and resources to mount a comprehensive and coordinated campaign to start eliminating human trafficking, not only domestically, but internationally. So this law, it's huge. There's a huge packet that comes with it, but what it means is that there's a process. So are we inducing or recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining by the use of force, fraud, or coercion for an end that is commercial sex acts, labor services, debt, or debt bondage, kind of breaking it down. There is a difference for minors. So what is force? These are some great examples of force. Isolation and confinement are often those beginning stages for all trafficking. This isn't just sex or labor trafficking. It's that trafficker taking someone, isolating them either physically or emotionally. You could be someone grooming a child online. They can basically see someone's life. They know the right questions to ask. They ask that child, how's your day going? And that child or an adult says, it's not going great. My mom, my significant other, my brother, they're just horrible. They made me wash the dishes. They don't understand me. And that trafficker will say, well, I understand you. I get it. And they've developed those relationships. They use confinement. Now that is physical. They'll either keep someone locked up or you have that force of you're only allowed to go home and to work and back. And that's it. You must ride with us. They monitor a lot of things, not only physical monitoring, but they'll often take phones. There's been situations where a survivor has been in the ER and that trafficker has taken them there. And even when the providers say, I need to have some space and privacy, they'll force that victim or that survivor to stay on video chat the entire time. It can look like physical restraint, physical harm, and sexual assault. And that happens again, both labor and sex trafficking. Fraud. What is fraud? That's the false promises, whether I'm saying, you're going to have great employment, you will take care of your visa. And oftentimes many of those that are trafficked have been brought, if they have a visa, they are brought to the United States legally. Now, it's not always the employer that trafficked them. It could be that middle, that middle person that said, we'll pay for your flight, we'll take care of the paperwork, come on over. And then they say, well, you owe us the $20,000 it took us to do that, but plus interest. And then that person never gets out of that debt bondage. It can be a false promise of wages. You're going to have great working conditions. We have seen marriage, right? Come and marry me. We're going to have a great life. That's even where the better life fits in. There have been kind of force and fraud. And then you look at fraud can be the nature of relationships. So someone that has been sex trafficked, right? Someone says, we're going to be, you're my girlfriend, you're my boyfriend. You expect a certain thing. Well, this has happened to numerous people where, okay, I'm working in a normal job, I have a great life, but someone, starts a relationship with me, and then I move in with them or move to a different state because they promised something better. And then you're forced into either a labor trafficking situation or a sex trafficking situation. And this has happened to an individual where they thought they were dating this person, and then this person said, no, you're going to go to the casino, you're going to do whatever these people tell you for this amount of time. And when you say, no, I'm not going to do that, that's no. They say, well, I met your family. Do you remember your grandma? If you don't do this, I'm going to hurt your grandma. Do you remember your cousin so-and-so? Well, we met there. I know where they live. I know everything about them. Or they'll even use children. I'm watching your child. If you want to see your child again, you are going to do these things that I tell you. Coercion gets a little more confusing, but luckily we just need to listen to what people are saying, right? That's when you're going to have those threats. A lot of psychological manipulation. So it starts with that grooming, but even many times that person will still, you can have that obvious force to where the person does not want to be trafficked, or you could have that person that is so psychologically manipulated that they actually think that their trafficker cares about them. Happens again, both in sex and labor trafficking. You have that trust in that individual and you're expecting them, you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, you trust them, you've been in a relationship with them, you think that that's your relationship, and you find out that that's not. It can be document confiscation. So it can be, this happens oftentimes that a trafficker will withhold either driver's license, visas, passports. They use threats of deportation. This happens to adults and children, is pictures. We may all have taken a picture we may have regretted, regardless of the situation. They'll use those pictures and say, if you don't do what I'm saying, I'm going to share this with your whole church. I'm going to share this with your family. In some cultures, that's very shaming, and you would never be able to return home. Manipulating a substance use disorder. Some of those that have been trafficked start with a substance use, that's an easy vulnerability to use, but others either are forced to start using substances or turn to substances as a way to cope. If I was being forced to perform commercial sex acts with 50 people a day or to keep a quota, I probably would want to be checked out and on drugs as well. Using the law, a lot of our those that have been trafficked have not had great interactions with law enforcement. Either they weren't seen as a potential victim, they were charged with something. We're all human, we're all learning. And we work a lot with law enforcement. We have some great law enforcement in North Dakota that do a good job, but we all have our bad day, right? We all have that day. We don't want to ask what happened to someone. We want to say, what's wrong with you? So in the end, throughout all of that, who can be trafficked? Anyone. We are all at risk. In North Dakota, we have served primarily female victims. However, again, only as good as what is reported. I believe we will see an uptick in male victims identified because we are doing a lot more labor trafficking education. We're actually seeing a lot more of those cases, but also why it's so difficult is one, oftentimes men are not screened for trafficking. There are also not very many services available for men. Now, this is a rough estimate. I've been quoted on this before, and it's not the exact quote, but if we look throughout the United States, I've helped some male clients. There are roughly 6 male-specific human trafficking shelters for men across the whole United States. In each state, there's usually at least one for women, if not almost one in every town that has a shelter. So that's something to think about, is that there's just not as many services to provide, but also there's not those screening. Now with labor trafficking, it's understanding what your rates are. If anyone has ever read labor laws, they're very confusing. I'm so glad we have a labor trafficking specialist that understands most of them. I know some because my family owned a business and I needed to understand it, but it's educating. It's listening when someone says, well, I'm not getting paid as much as I should have. I'm being forced to work 16 hours a day or I'll be deported, and hearing and saying that's not okay. That is not actually what is right. You have rights, regardless if you're from our country or not, you have rights in our country. So when someone is moving here and their employer is the one that's saying, you have to work 16 hours, that's normal, you're understanding that that's the cultural norm of America, of which most of us would say, no, I'm not working 16 hours unless you're going to pay me some big overtime. But these are the people that are here. They want to work hard. They want to better their life. They were promised something, and then those promises became false. So in the end, what are the vulnerabilities? They break down into 4 categories. Those who need love, need income, want romantic relationships, or want to better their circumstances. I think I fall into 1 or 4 at least 2 times a week. Luckily, I am educated. I have a great support system, and I don't have a lot of the systemic vulnerabilities that are seen, that I am not one that someone could come and talk to. But I have been on some low days and I've been manipulated by someone before, that I recognize how easy it is for someone to slip in and have that connection with you. The vulnerabilities can look like unstable living conditions, history of domestic violence, anyone that's facing poverty or economic need, history of sexual abuse, again, addicted to drugs, but a big one that we see is homelessness, not having that stable place to live. I think many of the clients that we have served have been on that side at least once or twice. With children, or those that are youth under the age of 18, it can look like survival, right? You're forced to live on the street. Someone offers you a couch. You're, yeah, I would like to sleep on a couch. And then that can turn into survival sex, where it's, well, you stayed on my couch last night. Now you owe me if you want to stay this night. You have to have sex with me to sleep on my couch. We talk about vulnerable adults. Vulnerable adults, any age, can be victims of human trafficking, both labor and sex trafficking. I've not worked with any clients in our state yet, but there have been in other states. I've listened to stories of those that are, someone's grandma was locked in a basement and forced to do commercial sex acts, and their guardian took that money. Now, that's, one of those dark stories where you're thinking of kidnapping, and that's not necessarily happening. But why isn't someone reporting that? Well, it's that fear of long-term placement. Again, that trust. If it's someone that's asking you to do these things or telling you to do these things, you have that trust relationship. Not always recognizing that you're being exploited. We have many neurodivergent individuals that live in our state, and I think we're recognizing more and more and able to identify. And when you live your life and you expect that to be your world, and you want to try to live in the more neurotypical world, you may not understand exactly how relationships are formed. Again, fear, stigma, or retaliate, the fear of disbelief, stigma, or retaliation. I like to point out again, we live in one big city with a lot of suburbs. If you saw your trafficker going to church or drinking with the local sheriff, are you likely to report? If you see that they're best buds, who is going to believe you, right? Those are kind of those ideas that you have going through your mind. So who can be your trafficker? Again, this is one of Rati's slides, but what it means is anyone can be a trafficker, right? They may come into your life as that hero, as that prince, but they may also come in as a villain with that force, that fraud right away. But oftentimes I see a lot of that buildup of relationships. It's scary to say that it's people close to you. It can be that business. We'll talk about it a little bit later, what that looks like, but case law and a lot of the evidence that we see is that a trafficker could be someone you know, it could be someone you don't know. And even if you're not the trafficked individual, a trafficker could be your next door neighbor, it could be law enforcement, a trafficker could be someone that is a clergy member, anyone. All across the United States, we've seen many different traffickers, male or female, doesn't matter, and can be young or old. I think we sometimes have this idea of what a trafficker looks like, either dirty, dark, and scary, or one that's flashy. They're smart. Traffickers are very manipulative, but there's no one look or one way to look and say someone is a trafficker. So there are grooming techniques that are used. Oftentimes, again, this kind of explain that force, fraud, or coercion. And we see a lot of this with youth. So there's that initial contact, that special contact. Instagram, man, that's like a menu, right? Type in a hashtag, you could probably find the blonde next door. And you use those statuses, just by asking questions, someone can find out pretty easily where you live, what school you go to. There's that history of sexual violence, that sexual assault. If you grew up with it, that is your norm. That's your cultural norm. So understanding that that isn't what normal looks like is, that's on us to either teach or show. We've had instances where, and I keep hearing this more and more with people that I know, is mom or dad can't afford rent. So they send child to the landlord and say, do whatever that landlord asks. Again, that's sexual assault. Your mom trusts, you trust your mom to send you somewhere, do whatever they ask. And that's where that commercial sex act that happens. And that's when we see trafficking. Can be peer recruitment. Sometimes that looks like someone that, has fancy clothes, has a fancy bag. And we see teens that want to live that lifestyle, and even adults, right? I would like to have some fancy designer bags, but you see that and then you want that and you can get brought into that life. Again, that relationship, that isolation. I am the only one that cares. I'm the only one that understands. So what it truly looks like is they find that core need that's unmet or that vulnerability that's unprotected. And again, we all have vulnerabilities, we all have needs, but they find that. And I say that it usually starts with a true promise. It's not always right into that false promise, but that's when exploitation and trafficking occurs. We can break this down into several jars and look at it for different types of youth and how they end up in different situations, but really it can fall under anywhere. But we see a lot of runaway and homeless youth. We see youth in and out of home care, a lot of foster youth. Undocumented youth, right? You're not likely to go to law enforcement if they've been painted as that villain or as someone that could get your parents deported, get you deported. We see a lot of LGBTQ youth. One being, you have someone that's raised in a middle-class family and they come out to their parents and their parents are not supportive and kick them out of the house. Well, I wouldn't know what to do on the streets. So they trust the first person that offers them a place to stay. And again, that's when survival sex can happen. Or working long hours. It can happen in domestic work, restaurants, hospitals. You're working, either you're not old enough to actually be working, There are especially laws during the school year that prevent, I think, 14-year-olds from working long hours, but you're kept there longer because you're trying to work for a place to stay. Past trauma is a big one. And then that trauma continues throughout life or throughout being trafficked. So looking at labor trafficking, again, that forced fraud or coercion for individual labor services, involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage. Again, those means threats of harm, abuse, or threatened abuse of the legal system. Now looking at this, so this graphic kind of shows the intersections. Labor exploitation is not trafficking, okay? But I mean, it's not right. It's not right to have labor law code violations. But when you have those code violations, that's when you're looking for the force, fraud, or coercion. Again, if you suspect any of this, you can contact us and we'll work through it, not to completely understand, because it takes, I mean, I'm still learning how to recognize some force, fraud, or coercion. I have started watching interviews of survivors of different things to kind of help understand and look. And I've found that if you pay attention, even if someone doesn't identify as a victim, you can see some either exploitation in their story or some trafficking that has happened. So looking at it, there's always going to be that unequal relationship between a worker and employer, right? We have the power dynamic, but it's when that power dynamic is held and used against that person. So are they stealing the immigration documents? Are they not allowing someone to leave the premises? This example that I'm going to share happened in Idaho, and I think it really shows how professionals can walk into a situation and think that they are going to have a job, and how it kind of gets crumbled. Their world gets crumbled. So there was a dairy farmer. They went down to Mexico to hire vet techs that were recently graduated from university. They coached them through what to say to get their visas all approved. They and told them they were going to be vet techs, and they hired them. So these professionals, they moved to Idaho. They were working on a dairy farm expecting to be vet techs, and actually it turned out that they were little more than dairy hands. They were expected to do manual labor. They weren't actually taking care of the cattle. There were several instances where they weren't allowed to leave the house, but the big ones that stick out to me is one of the workers injured their finger to the point of almost cutting it off, and we're told to just wrap it up and finish the day. This happened several times. These workers were told that if they didn't work for this individual, they would lose their visas, where in fact that visa was the type of visa that when you work, as long as you find the same type of work, you can stay in the country. So they could have found other vet work and stayed. Instead, they were forced to stay with this. They were told false lies. They were forced to stay in their house. They weren't given what they were promised. This took going to court twice, several times before anyone would even take it seriously. And there were obvious blatant. So like when you're talking to someone and you hear they're saying, oh, I have to be back to my residence by this time, I'm working forced hours, or you have someone that's been injured and unable to seek medical care, those are all kind of indications of trafficking. So looking, how does exploitation lead to labor trafficking? Well, again, you may get less pay than promised, but it's when you're getting those threats of violence, you're being intimidated or controlled. You kind of look through that. It starts as exploitation, can move to trafficking. So Polaris, it's kind of a nationwide repository of education. They keep a lot of the research. They are in charge of the human trafficking hotline. They looked at 25 settings. They're all listed here. The ones that are bigger had more indications of trafficking. So 19 out of 25 settings, they found trafficking. Now it can be anywhere from, like I said, agricultural and animal husbandry, but it can also be someone begging on the street. I've had calls of people concerned that those that were begging were being forced to beg at the side. Sorry, I say beg like a North Dakotan, so it doesn't always sound correct, but being forced to beg. And if they didn't reach their quota, they either didn't have a place to stay that night or they weren't given food. Traffickers will often use food deprivation, sleep deprivation as a way of control. It's happened in recreational facilities. I think we all have, we think of maybe a massage parlor. Well, that can be both labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Oftentimes both interconnect. I was listening to an advocate that works with Chinese immigrants in New York City, and she again used, when you have an employer that says, this is just what it is, this is what you do, that's how you see the American life, and you don't know any different. You don't speak English, or you don't speak it well, oftentimes not even being aware that you can call 911 to receive, and that someone will come and help you regardless of your status. So there's operational indicators, and then which lead into the force, coercion, deception, fraud, that abuse of power and vulnerability, and that control, exploitation. And when we're looking at those, really it's understanding the definition, because I would love to say there are 6 surefire red flag signs that indicate labor trafficking, but that's just not the case. It's oftentimes it looks like several other things. And again, it's understanding the definition, listening to someone, and being able to offer that, let me help you, or that's not how life works. Let's talk about this, but also not shaming or making someone feel bad for the situation they're in. So there's different types of recruitment. And I'm honestly going to skip this slide. And when they look at these, there's different levels of indication. So there can be medium indicators, and we are working on a complete list as a task force. We have subcommittees, and this is actually something we're working on, so that if you have maybe, if you have 16 low indicators altogether, that kind of makes some strong indicators. So medium indicators that have been researched, is the conditions of work. Maybe we've all worked somewhere that didn't have the best conditions, but were you deceived about that, right? Were you given a tour and you knew, okay, this isn't the best, but this is where I'm at? Or were you told that it's going to be the best working condition? You're going to make so much money, your living and housing conditions are going to be great. It's kind of looking at those different indicators. For children, again, it's the same thing. Children can be trafficked in labor trafficking. And then there's violence. Again, those threats of either them calling the authorities to have someone deported, or threats that they're going to tell family or hurt somebody. There's all those different indicators. So I'm going to get to the sex trafficking. I think this is what we often think about. It's portrayed in the news oftentimes more because sex trafficking is a sexy topic. It gets a lot of money thrown at it. But to really understand what it is, it's a person that's made to perform a commercial sex act through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. All 3 do not need to be present. That's why I have that or kind of squared in red. Or it's someone under 18 that performs a commercial sex act. Now, what is a commercial sex act? That's a sex act that's exchanged for anything of value. So that's money, shelter, drugs. But again, you can still have force, fraud, or coercion, but it can just be the basic commercial sex act. So there is no such thing as a child prostitute. There were laws in the past that, if you're 13 and a 40-year-old has sex with you, that is considered sexual assault or rape, and that 40-year-old would be charged. But in the past, if that 40-year-old paid the 13-year-old to have sex, then she could be charged as a child prostitute. Well, now we have the safe harbor laws that's working on not re-victimizing, our youth, and they are not able to consent. Now, understanding that for an adult, it may start as consensual, but it could turn into them not wanting to, and that's where that sex trafficking occurs. Now, not everybody that works within sex work or that is a sex worker is trafficked, but there is evidence that at some point they may have been in a trafficking situation. So side by side, sex trafficking can look like regular prostitution, like what we think of. It can start as stripping or be stripping and pornography. if a child is forced to be a part or chooses to be a part of any pornography, that is someone paying for their pictures, someone paying for, an OnlyFans, and they're underage, that is trafficking. So whoever is a part of that is involved in trafficking. Again, labor trafficking, it could be selling drugs for a drug trafficker. Are they being forced to sell? Some of those that have been sex trafficked are forced to have a quota. So they need to make a certain amount of money within a certain amount of time. And sometimes they do turn to selling drugs as being part of that because the trafficker doesn't care. They just want money. Why does a trafficker oftentimes do sex trafficking? Well, you can sell drugs once, but you can sell a person multiple times. Within what we have served in North Dakota, we've primarily served United States residents, but again, I think that this is going to shift as we do more labor trafficking outreach and as we do more education to everyone, right? We all have that part to play. So what does recruitment look like for labor trafficking? It can look like, you're living in your home country, you're learning of a position from a friend, from social media, from a job opening, rehab facilities, jails, prisons. It can be anywhere that they find you and you meet with a recruiter and they're like, this is going to be great. You're going to have a great job. And this can also happen in the United States the same exact way. It works the same way, whether it's labor or sex trafficking. It might be called something different, but works the same way. And they work to either get the documents needed or the money or the transportation, and then you're moved to where you're going to be trafficked. Movement is not required, but that's often how labor trafficking workers are entering the US. So there are a lot of visas for various different kinds of workers. I don't have the exact number, but something that I find interesting for North Dakota is that in the state of North Dakota, we have over 900 agricultural units. So that can be farmers, ranchers, greenhouse, I believe landscape also fits under there, and they have authorized visa workers to come work for them. So those entities themselves may not be trafficking, but those middle agencies, those that did the recruiting, could be trafficking those individuals. So again, understanding it's great. We don't always have the biggest workforce in North Dakota, but it's learning, getting to know these people, and just having those conversations. Now, if those visas expired, if someone has been trafficked, there are visas, it's called a T visa, and that is a visa they're able to apply for. We've helped individuals apply for those. So I have another survivor quote. We may act hard, but we have to have the wall up for survival. Deep down, we know we need help. Those clients that I have served have been some of the most astute, brilliant human beings I have met. I have had some look at me and tell me my life story, and I'm like, I did not tell you any of that, but they have learned to read the room. They've learned who is going to be safe, who is not going to be safe, but some of their past experiences are now their barriers to prevent not only identification, but them self-identifying. They've had that past experience with medical providers, either not listening or being a part of their exploitation. That past trauma, again, that hopelessness. When you've never been told you are valuable as a human being, that your worth is not how much you can be sold for, but you are worthy of life. If nobody has ever told you or asked you if you are safe, you're not going to have trust in anybody to share anything, because maybe that one time you said what was going on and someone said, well, you deserved it. Or someone said you did it to yourself. I don't ever want to be that person that says that. I may have in the past. We're all guilty of saying things maybe we weren't understanding, but this is something to think about now. And I just want everybody to know that you're valued if you've never been told that. And I've worked really hard with our clients to work through that and talk about that, because that is a big thing. Past experience with medical providers may continue on. You may say, they oftentimes know your past because that's part of your medical history, and may not believe you now when you have things that are going on. We've had a lot of stories of clients that have a lot of fear of going to medical providers. The individual barriers, not understanding that you've been victimized. feeling like you were a part of that illegal act, that it was your choice, that person, you have that trauma bond, that person is your family member, that boyfriend. You may have a language barrier. There are many barriers to either self-identifying or sharing, or even for us as service providers or us as individuals in the community. There's a lot of barriers for us seeing things. People are good at hiding. What are those providers? We may not have access to interpreters. Again, we may not know about trafficking, but that's not an excuse now after you've been in this. You may not understand trauma-informed care. I'm not going to get into a lot of it in this presentation because we could talk about trauma-informed care for 3 hours, but it is something interesting to look into. I was starting to do some research. There's actually organizations now using trauma-informed housing, how to design a place that is safe for those that have been victimized or those that have experienced trauma. But actually, we've all experienced trauma, right? I think we've all had collective trauma. We've lived through a pandemic. So whether you believe it or not, whatever your views are, we've experienced that collective trauma together. So we all have some experience that maybe we see a lot of providers or a lot of people, you won't sit with your back to a door. When you're in a restaurant, you won't sit, you want to have your back against a wall. That has to do with past trauma, those past experiences. So what can you guys do, right? What is the solution to all of this? A survivor had said, think about things from our point of view. Never say you don't understand because you haven't been there, but still try to put yourself in our shoes. So again, having that belief, just because somebody is kind to you doesn't mean that they're kind behind the scenes or that they're kind to everyone. There's prominent people that have been involved in this, not only as traffickers, but as those that have been involved on the other side of the exploitation. A survivor's journey is long and trauma is lasting. So we've had survivors that have been out of being trafficked for years, and that trauma still comes up. They may be sharing their story, or they may just be talking to someone, and those feelings, those emotions, something has triggered it to come back. It could still linger in the fact that you have, with housing, you have a felony, or you just have a prostitution charge on your record. There have been instances where somebody lived with their husband had a record that had to do with drugs, and that was fine, but it was because her record had a prostitution charge. They weren't able to get an apartment. Happens with jobs. It happens with a lot. There's this stigma associated with it. Understanding that the needs don't stop at identification, that's only a small part of it. And understanding that you could be that one, right? I mentioned it can take 15 interactions. There's not an exact number. It's different for every person. But if we all can be that person, from the highway stop, from the, sitting down wanting to get a house, to coming and I meet someone in a grocery store because I'm chatty with everybody, is asking, are you safe? When you're hearing any of those little indicators, anything that makes you think that they're being forced into something, or a big one is, I gave all my money away, or this is a cultural example. So there's a family, the 18-year-old children go work, but when they get home, they're forced to give their money, or they give their money to the oldest man in the house. In and of itself, you're 18, you can give your money to whoever you want to give your money to. However, if they were to say no, if they were told that that is not required, that they have every right to keep that money, what would that individual say? If that person would force them and say, well, you're not going to get your identification, you're not going to be able to live with me. If they use that force, fraud, or coercion, then it becomes trafficking. So again, it's listening to someone's story and understanding that, yes, that could be cultural, but sharing that isn't how all of us Americans live. So again, more barriers to housing, work history. If you've been trafficked, we had an individual who now 3 years has been living out of being trafficked. But there's no legitimate work experience beyond those 3 years. And then having stable employment, jobs that you're going to have typically that don't, if you have a felony on your background, it's not always stable employment. It could be working at a restaurant, but you could be the one cut. You're not going to have savings for a security deposit. Sometimes credit history is bad because of what your choice was, but oftentimes traffickers use their credit. We've had situations where individuals didn't even know how many lines of credit were taken out until our BCI agent did a full credit check. And then again, a lot of those criminal records. So one of our survivors, at first, I was hesitant to go out in public. I was scared and traumatized by our experience. Through the help of organizations that supported us, we were able to find courage and strength to share our experience to the public. It surely does feel good to be able to give back to the community who had given us a lot of support and love. I love sharing that because that's, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There are those that get out of being in a traffic situation and thrive. There are those that start businesses, that get a college education, and those are the ones that are so exciting. But again, success isn't measured by who's getting that education. It's measured by who is safe. Is that person, are we getting them safe for one night? Is that person, recovering from drugs? And maybe we see them for 3 months and then something happens that triggers and they go back into that lifestyle. Sometimes that happens because it's easier. That's what we know, or that trauma bond. But you know what? We are always there when they are ready to come back. I always say, prodigal son, man, come on back. We'll welcome you with open arms and let's see if we can get you safe for another night. So what are those protective factors? This isn't just against labor trafficking, but against all trafficking. Personal characteristics and personal experience. But one thing that you can affect is those relationships and community factors. Are you creating a protective environment for those that work with you? Are you creating a protective environment for your family? Are you there if your child says, you know what, I messed up, I sent a picture, and now they're threatening to show that picture to everyone I know if I don't do what they say? Not condemning that individual, but saying, all right. And if you can't talk about it in that moment because you're heated, say, you know what, give me a moment, walk away, gather yourself and say, all right, we're in this together. And then do not send those pictures anywhere, but go talk to law enforcement. They can track a lot of things on a phone. I find out more and more what they can track and what they can look at and what they can get subpoenas for. Societal factors, what are the norms and policies? Are we tolerating violence, or are we creating sustainable protective factors around the people that we work with in our schools? What is our government choosing? The things that our task force has helped with most with our victims, this is the list, but housing is one of the top. One of the sad things to say when we're looking for housing is which places allow a background, that allow criminal record. Well, they end up being a lot of slumlords, to be honest. I don't have a better term for it. You have people that's where exploitation can happen again. So we're always looking for those safe homes, those safe neighborhoods. Another survivor said, get educated. The more you know, the more you can help. Be kind. Don't treat us with pity. Be patient, be understanding. So what does that look like when you're creating housing, when you're working with people? Well, be very aware of language. What language are you using? Are you using understanding victim-centered language, or are you saying what's wrong with you versus what happened to you? A big one is emphasizing honor and choice. Somebody that has never had choice in their life, giving them those options, not making choices for someone, but honoring those choices. And they may not always be the choices that we expect or that we would make, but it's honoring those. As you can see, some different things, if you have overgrown shrubs in your entrances, chop them down, give them a little prune. I just recently watched a lot of videos on bonsai. If you want to give that a try, that's a great place to try it out. Being prompt when there's those safety concerns, when there's broken locks, the lights are out in the hallway, what can we do to help fix some of that? Changing some of our policies. Having the right to change some locks if there's needed security enhancements. If there's victimization and that person needs to get out, is there a way to break the lease without penalty as long as there's adequate documentation? And understanding, is there housing discrimination based off of history or status of the victim of a crime? Was there an eviction? Why did that eviction happen? Was it because a trafficker, made them move? Was it because a trafficker took all of their money? What was going on there? And from the Polaris project, they did a housing report, and it's just understanding that at any time that survivor has the right to call the police for emergency assistance. And they may call to have someone there if either they're doing a custody trade, or even potentially if you're coming in to do some repairs or you're coming in to talk, they may want someone else there. It could be law enforcement, it could be an advocate. We work with a nonprofit and they have mentors, and sometimes that mentor goes and sits with them either for doctor's appointments, housing appointments, or even as simple as they aren't ready to go grocery shopping by themselves. Keeping confidentiality. We all know the importance of it, but I'm going to say it anyways, of any of the housing records or even the victim status. So you don't have to be an expert. It's not about rescuing or saving anybody. I wouldn't want to be rescued or saved, but it's about being that person that's there, offering education, offering, can I get you some food? Like what is the immediate need? Are you cold? Is someone dressed inappropriately for the weather? We've had some real crazy weather here. If someone doesn't have the right shoes, maybe questioning why they don't have the right shoes. Now, it's not my coworker that chooses to wear sandals all year round. That's a little different, but somebody that, maybe they're wearing those short skirts and flip-flops in the winter. What's going on with that? Or it could be as simple as someone that's doing, are they forced to shovel snow and they don't have an adequate coat? Kind of recognizing some of those things. It can be prevented, but people continue to look the other way and just continue to live their life. They act like it doesn't exist and act like it's not a problem. People need to learn the red flags, and if they suspect anything, they need to contact law enforcement and the human trafficking hotline. So what do you do in any situation, in any emergency? Call 911. I'm on my soapbox. If you see flames, call 911. I used to work at the police department and we would get non-emergent calls for very emergent things. If it is not emergent, someone's safety, it's not a child, and there's not emergent immediate response, you can just call your local law enforcement to talk. You can report tips on our website. It looks like this. Our tips are anonymous. They're actually HIPAA compliant. So if you're worried about that, but just leave information, as much information as you can. I mean, you don't need to give like personal details about the individual or what you see, but if you're at a gas station and you see something that you question and you see a car that you question, put the license plate, make and model down, put what you saw, what you talked about, because we track these. They go to a central database in North Dakota. And if that same vehicle, is popping up in front of your apartment, your house, but it's also popping up in front of our shelters, we're going to start tracking that and looking at it. We track everything, no matter what. Our law enforcement look into every tip, even if it's goofy. We've had some real goofy ones, but they look into all of those. Everyone is needed. We all have that place we all have our place and our role to play, from churches to individuals, educators, nonprofits, government. And if we can all work together, that's truly when we can be that light in the darkness and the darkness can go. So I like to end with this survivor quote. I have encountered many people who have been kind to my family and me. I am so grateful to the many people who have been there through my whole journey. They have all respected me and my decisions. So again, respect, that honor, and choice. It may not be the choice we would make, but respect that. And as I open it up for questions, I'm going to keep it on this slide for a little bit. That is my information. You are always welcome to call or text. I found out that number is available on our website, so it's a free for all anyway, or email me. I'm pretty prompt. at emailing. And then that is our labor trafficking specialist email if you have those specific questions. But again, I can also help coordinate that. So I will leave that up for a little bit. And if there are questions, I can take those now.
If anyone has a question, please type it in the chat box. Anybody have any comments or feedback or anything that maybe needs clarification by Sarah?
I'm just going to take that I did amazing today and you all understand everything, and I'm going to get a lot of calls because you have a lot of identification. Okay. Yeah, how long does it take for officers to look into a report? And that varies. We're very quick. I know where our reports go to, or where those tips go, or are we, well, we'll go through that, where a tip goes. Okay. It's very quick when it especially is involved with children. If it's something that, you know, we have our intelligence base, they'll track some, like if it's that vehicle, right? They'll track that, or they send it almost immediately to the local law enforcement. We're very quick. And actually, so there's a national hotline, and we usually get a tip before they do. So when we get that tip and then the national hotline tells us, we've already usually looked into it. If law enforcement gets a report, it can depend. So if a patrol officer takes it, it goes through that individual's or through that individual agency's process. From the police department I worked at, it would be like if you reported something today, usually the next morning it gets assigned to a detective. Now, if it's emergent, typically a detective is there right away. Now, if someone comes to me, or I'm working with an agency, not an agency, but I'm working with service providers, and someone has been identified and they want to report to law enforcement, I have contacts with specific detectives in almost every agency within my region that we can bring a detective in right away. If it was in multiple locations in North Dakota, we have BCI agents that can come right away. And if that person was trafficked across state lines, we have Homeland Security and FBI we can bring in right away. The goal is so that that person isn't being re-victimized, re-traumatized by having to share their story 15 times. We want to get it to that person that needs to hear it right away so they can make that report. So to say how long it takes, we work as fast as we can. So probably if a report came in on Saturday, it would be a little bit slower than if it comes in on a Monday. If you report to me, it takes a lot longer. All right, concerned on a flight. Yes, yes, and yes. So yes, there are, I would, one, kind of see if they're with someone, because we want you to be safe too, right? I don't want any vigilantes out there. I'm not a vigilante. I don't carry a gun. I'm not law enforcement. So if you report to me, I don't go out. I get a law enforcement person and I'll have you report to law enforcement. On a plane, I would see if that person is, you know, scared to talk in front of someone, then maybe I would talk to the flight attendant and say you're concerned that something is going on. Because they most have some sort of training and they may have someone waiting when that person gets off the flight to maybe talk to them. If it looks like, you know, maybe if that person they were scared of left, ask them if they're safe, or try to discreetly ask. We, even with our law enforcement, we have cards that have just the National Human Trafficking Hotline number on them. And we give that out because anywhere in the United States, if they call, they will be connected with someone. So I've had someone that was in Bismarck called that number. I got a call and they were put on the phone with me and I could help direct them to services. So maybe if you can't necessarily talk to them, slip them some, say like, if you're unsafe, let me know, like kind of discreetly talk to that person. But if you do not feel comfortable, talk to a flight attendant for sure and have them check on them. I do not have an answer, Michael.
Michael, for the certificate, email Stacey. You would have got the Zoom link information from her yesterday, I believe. But if you just email her, she will get that out to you.
Good questions, though. I will tell you, like I said, I've been doing this, we're going on 2 years. And my mom asked what she was supposed to do. And I felt like I failed her. I'm like, I feel like I told you, but let's try it again. So sometimes it takes being told a couple of times.
Are there any other questions, comments, feedback, anything?
And I will say, like I said, if any of you are interested in joining any of our multidisciplinary teams, being a part of that, offering your expertise or your experiences, feel free to email me. I'll get you connected to the right region. I love to have different input. I think we all have that role to play and we all have, we see different things. So having our large teams, I think is good. So like I said, if you have any interest or you want more information, just give me a ring or, email Stacey and I'll get a hold of Stacey. But I will say I appreciate you guys having me here. I love any chance I get to talk to people. I love sharing my knowledge and it's only growing. And like I said, definitely ever-changing topic that we are constantly learning and evolving our responses and our organizations. So always new things to learn and talk about. What populations do you present to? Pretty much anyone. I have presented at a church, a community events. I've talked to nursing students. We try to present to as many people as we can. If we cannot, we have a lot of great partner organizations that will either connect you to, but we're also working with our trainers so that more of our community members can also be presenters. I have never presented to a high school, but some of my partners do. So that has been something that we have partnered with. 31-8 Project does a lot, YouthWorks does a lot, but we've also partnered and do presentations together. There is a hand signal being on his help. Can you touch on this? I watched those videos too. I also watched a whole video on someone that was trying to explain how not to get trafficked. And I was like, well, I think that's more kidnapping. I think those are great ideas. I think it's great to have that hand signal. I've never seen that hand signal used. In talking to the survivors that I have worked with, the clients that I've worked with, none of them have talked about it. Anything like a hand signal, if a trafficker sees that and sees, sometimes when a trafficker sees someone trying to reach out for help, they will, for lack of a better term, punish the person that is being trafficked. So I honestly don't know much about, I've watched the same videos and I've seen several different handshakes, but I've never heard of that being used with any of the clients that I've worked with. But again, personal experience from what I worked with, so I can't if I saw someone trying to reach out somehow, I'm very assertive and bold, and I would step up and say something, but they have not had that happen. And I guess in my mind too, with that is usually when we see that on TikTok or we see those videos, it's because we've been looking at other things, and I'm not sure how many of those that have had experience being trafficked are watching those TikToks necessarily, or those videos. That may not be in their algorithm. Good question. Any others?
If anyone thinks of any questions down the road, you can definitely email us, or we can get you Sarah's direct email for any questions that may pop up. I just want to thank you all for attending today's session, and thank you again, Sarah, for presenting to us. It's always great information and a highly requested topic. So again, if you need a certificate of participation, please email Stacey and she will get that out to you. Also, there will be a survey link coming out here shortly. Please take a few minutes to fill that out and provide any feedback and possible topics that you would like to see in future trainings. So again, thank you all for attending, and thank you again, Sarah, and hope everybody has a nice rest of the week.